In this episode, we're going to talk about trust, and specifically why most supplement brands are thinking about trust completely backwards. Now, I know that sounds dramatic, but here's what I mean. Most brands treat trust like a checklist. They think, okay, I need a doctor endorsement, check. I need some certifications, check. I need testimonials on my sales page, check. Trust built, right? Wrong. Because trust isn't a checklist item. Trust is a psychological force. And it's one of the 4 supplement buying forces that actually drives purchase decisions. And here's the thing that most marketers miss completely. Trust doesn't just work in one direction. It works in 2 completely different directions at the same time. It's both a pushing force and a pulling force. And if you don't understand how both of those work, you're probably building credibility in ways that don't actually move the needle on conversion. You might be adding elements to your sales page that look good, that feel like they should work, but they're not doing what you think they're doing. So by the end of this episode, you're going to understand why your current trust building strategy might be missing half the equation. And more importantly, what actually works when you're trying to get cold traffic to buy a supplement online. Okay, let's get to it. Welcome to Health Business Mastery, the Creative Thirst podcast. I'm your host, Bobby Hewitt. So let's start with the problem. The supplement industry has a trust deficit, and it's not a small one. It's massive. Think about it. For decades, supplement companies have been making claims they couldn't back up. Miracle cures, lose 30 pounds in 30 days, reverse aging, cure diabetes. The list goes on. And every time a company overpromises and underdelivers, it doesn't just hurt that company. It hurts the entire industry. It trains buyers to be skeptical of everything. So when someone lands on your sales page, even if you're a legitimate brand with a quality product, they're coming in with their guard up. They've been burned before. They've bought supplements that didn't work. They've seen claims that turned out to be garbage. This is the starting point for every supplement brand. You're not starting from zero trust. You're starting from negative trust. Now, compare that to other industries. If someone's buying a desk organizer or a phone case or even a skincare product, yeah, they want to make sure it's decent quality, but they're not coming in assuming you're lying to them. Supplements are different. The buyer psychology is different. And that's because supplements sit right in the middle of a functional purchase and an emotional purchase. On the functional side, buyers want to know how it works. What's the mechanism? What are the ingredients? Is there science backing this up? They're in research mode. They're thinking. But on the emotional side, they're buying hope. They're buying the future state where their problem is solved, where they feel better, look better, have more energy, whatever it is. And this creates a really interesting dynamic when it comes to trust, because the buyer is simultaneously trying to be rational and logical and scientific about their decision, while also being driven by emotion and hope. So they spend months researching. They read every article. They watch every video. They compare ingredients across 20 different brands. And then they buy based on emotion anyway. This is the paradox of supplement buying. And it's why trust is so critical and so misunderstood. Here's what most brands do wrong. They think trust is just about proving credibility. So they pile on the proof elements: doctor formulated, clinically tested, GMP certified, third-party tested, made in the USA, gluten-free, non-GMO. And look, those things matter. I'm not saying they don't. But if that's your entire trust strategy, you're missing half the picture. Because here's what happens. You add all these credibility badges to your sales page, and the buyer looks at them and thinks, okay, this looks legitimate, but so does every other supplement brand I've looked at. Everyone says they're doctor formulated. Everyone has certifications. Everyone has testimonials. So now you're in a credibility arms race, and the buyer still doesn't trust you any more than your competitors. This is where brands get stuck. They keep adding more proof, more studies, more endorsements, more badges, and conversion doesn't move. Why? Because they don't understand how trust actually functions as a psychological force. Let me explain what I mean. Trust is one of the 4 supplement buying forces. The other 3 are desire, hope, and belief. And these 4 forces work together to either push a buyer toward a purchase or pull them away from it. Now, most marketers understand desire and hope pretty intuitively. Desire is about amplifying the problem and the future state. Hope is about the unique mechanism, the reason why this solution will work when others haven't. But trust and belief, these are the forces that most brands get wrong. And trust in particular is misunderstood because it works in 2 completely different ways. Trust is both a pushing force and a pulling force. And you need to understand both if you want to actually build trust that converts. So let's start with trust as a pushing force. When trust acts as a pushing force, it's not about proving you're credible. It's about creating alignment. It's about making the prospect feel like you're on their side, like you see what they see, like you understand their frustration. The fastest way to do this is through what I call the common enemy approach. Here's how it works. You identify an external force that the prospect is already frustrated with or skeptical of, and you position yourself as being against that same force. In the supplement industry, the most common version of this is big pharma. But it doesn't have to be that. It could be the medical establishment that's dismissive of natural solutions. It could be supplement companies that use synthetic ingredients. It could be the mainstream approach to health that just treats symptoms instead of root causes. The point is, you're not asking the prospect to trust you based on your credentials. You're creating instant alignment by showing them you share their perspective. You have a common enemy. This is incredibly powerful because it bypasses the entire credibility arms race. The prospect doesn't need to evaluate your certifications or compare your doctor's credentials to another brand's doctor. They just need to feel like you get it, like you're like them. And this creates a pushing force. It pushes them toward your message because they feel understood. They feel like you're not just another supplement company trying to sell them something. You're someone who sees the same problems they see. Let me give you an example of how this shows up in copy. Bad version, the version most brands write, goes something like this. Our formula is doctor formulated, using the highest quality ingredients backed by clinical research. That's pure credibility. It's not bad, but it's not creating alignment. It's not pushing. Good version sounds more like this. The mainstream medical system wants you dependent on prescription drugs that mask symptoms instead of addressing root causes. That's not how we approach health. We believe your body has the ability to heal itself when you give it the right support. See the difference? The second version creates a common enemy. It positions the brand as being aligned with the prospect's frustration. And that alignment pushes the prospect toward the message faster than any credibility badge could. Now, here's the important part. This isn't about being anti-science or anti-medicine. It's about tapping into an existing frustration that your prospect already has. If your audience doesn't have that frustration, this approach won't work. You have to know your market. But when you do this right, trust as a pushing force is the fastest way to create affinity with cold traffic, because you're not asking them to evaluate your credentials. You're just asking them to recognize that you see what they see. Okay, so that's trust as a pushing force. Now let's talk about trust as a pulling force. When trust acts as a pulling force, this is where credibility actually matters, but it works differently than most brands think. Trust as a pulling force is about reducing anxiety. It's about removing the internal objections that keep someone from moving forward. Think about the buyer's journey. They land on your sales page. Maybe you've created that initial alignment, that pushing force through the common enemy approach. So now they're interested, they're engaged, they're reading. But as they go deeper into your sales message, the rational mind starts to kick in. Questions start popping up. How do I know this will work? Is this safe? What if it doesn't work for me? Is this company legitimate? These are the anxieties that pull the buyer away from the purchase. And this is where credibility elements come in. They pull the buyer back toward the purchase by answering those objections. But here's the key. Not all credibility signals carry the same weight. There's a hierarchy. And at the bottom of the hierarchy, you have the table stakes stuff, third-party testing, GMP certification, made in the USA. These are important. They need to be there, but they don't really differentiate you because everyone has them. In the middle of the hierarchy, you have things like ingredient sourcing transparency, manufacturing process details, the story behind how the formula was developed. These are more powerful because fewer brands do them well, and they speak to the buyer who's done research and knows what questions to ask. At the top of the hierarchy, you have borrowed credibility. This is where doctor endorsements and clinical studies actually matter. But here's the nuance. The credibility you're borrowing has to match your audience. Let me explain what I mean. If your audience is older, more conservative, more likely to trust traditional medical authority, then a doctor endorsement carries weight. It pulls them through the objection of, is this legitimate? But if your audience is younger, more skeptical of the medical establishment, more aligned with functional medicine or holistic health, then a traditional doctor endorsement might actually hurt you. It might make you look like you're part of the system they don't trust. So the credibility signals you use have to match the beliefs and values of your market. This is why you can't just copy what another supplement brand is doing. You have to know your audience. Now let's talk about how transparency functions as a pulling force, because this is one of the most underutilized trust-building strategies in the supplement industry. Transparency is powerful because it's rare. Most supplement brands are opaque. They don't tell you where their ingredients come from. They don't explain their manufacturing process. They don't show you behind the scenes. So when you do show those things, it creates trust, not because you're proving you're better than your competitors, but because you're removing the mystery. You're answering questions before the buyer even asks them. And this pulls the buyer forward because it reduces anxiety. They're not wondering, they're seeing. Here's a tactical example. Instead of just saying premium quality ingredients, you say our magnesium is sourced from the Dead Sea, where the mineral concentration is 20 times higher than regular seawater. It's harvested using a solar evaporation process that preserves the natural mineral matrix. That's specific, it's transparent, and it answers the question of what makes your magnesium different before the buyer has to ask. Or instead of just saying manufactured in an FDA-registered facility, you walk them through your quality control process. Every batch is tested 3 times, once when the raw ingredients arrive, once during manufacturing, and once before the finished product is released. Here's what we test for. Again, you're pulling the buyer forward by reducing anxiety. You're showing them the process, not just claiming the result. Now, here's where this gets really interesting. There's actually a framework for how trust builds online. And it's not what most marketers think. Most marketers think trust builds slowly and linearly. You add credibility over time. The buyer gradually learns to trust you. But that's not how online behavior actually works. Trust online is built fast, then slow. Let me explain what I mean. When a visitor lands on your page, they make a trust assessment in seconds, not minutes, seconds. They're looking at the design, the headline, the opening copy, the visual credibility signals. and they're making a fast decision. Do I trust this enough to keep reading, or do I bounce? This is the fast phase, and this is where trust shortcuts matter. Things like professional design, clear messaging, trust marks and badges that signal legitimacy at a glance. These elements don't build deep trust, but they build enough trust to move the visitor to the next micro step, which is to actually read your copy, to engage with your message. Once they make that decision, then trust builds slowly. As they read, as they see your evidence, as they encounter your transparency, as they connect with your story, trust deepens. But you can't get to the slow phase without passing through the fast phase first. This is why you see brands that have all the right credibility elements, all the right proof, all the right science, but their bounce rate is terrible because they're failing the fast trust test. The visitor never gets to the slow trust phase where all that credibility would actually matter. So here's how you think about this strategically. For the fast trust phase, you need visual and structural trust signals, clean design, professional imagery, clear value proposition, recognizable trust badges. These signal in seconds that you're legitimate enough to spend time with. For the slow trust phase, you need substantive credibility, transparency, specificity, proof, the deeper elements that answer the rational objections and pull the buyer through to purchase. Both matter, but they serve different functions in the trust building process. Okay, so let's talk about how this actually plays out in the real world, because I know this is all pretty conceptual so far. So let me give you some specific examples of how successful supplement brands build trust. First example, there's a longevity supplement brand that's doing really well right now. And when you look at their trust strategy, they're nailing both the pushing force and the pulling force. On the pushing force side, their entire brand positioning is anti-aging industry. They're saying, look, the anti-aging industry wants to sell you creams and serums and procedures. But real longevity happens at the cellular level. It's about mitochondrial health. It's about NAD+ levels. It's about addressing the root causes of aging, not just the symptoms. So they've created this common enemy, which is the superficial approach to anti-aging. And that pushes their audience toward them because their audience already feels that frustration. Then on the pulling force side, they're incredibly transparent about their formulation process. They show the research that led them to their specific ingredient combinations. They explain why they use certain forms of certain compounds instead of cheaper alternatives. They publish third-party test results for every batch. And all of that transparency pulls the buyer through the objections. It reduces anxiety. It answers the questions. So they're using trust as both a pushing force and a pulling force, and it works. Second example, there's a gut health brand that's built their entire trust strategy around borrowed credibility, but they're doing it in a really smart way. They partnered with a functional medicine doctor who has a big following in their target market. Not just any doctor, a doctor who their audience already knows and trusts. So they're borrowing that trust. And it works as a pulling force because when their audience sees this doctor's endorsement, it answers the objection of, will this actually work? But here's the key. This only works because they matched the credibility source to their audience. If they had partnered with a traditional gastroenterologist, it probably wouldn't have worked as well because their audience is already skeptical of traditional medicine. They're looking for a functional medicine approach. So the borrowed credibility has to align with the beliefs of the market. Third example, there's a supplement brand in the joint health space that's doing something really interesting with transparency. Instead of just claiming their ingredients are high quality, They're showing the entire supply chain. They have videos of the farms where their turmeric is grown. They show the extraction process. They explain why their curcumin has higher bioavailability than standard curcumin. And this transparency pulls buyers forward because it's so rare. Most supplement brands just say premium ingredients and move on. But this brand is showing, not just telling. And that transparency builds trust faster than any certification badge could. Now let's talk about marketplace sophistication, because how you build trust has to change based on how sophisticated your market is. If you're in a stage 3 market, which is where most supplement categories are, the market has heard all the basic claims before. They're skeptical. They've tried other products that didn't work. So at this stage, you need a unique mechanism. You need to give them a reason to believe that your solution is different from everything they've tried before. And that unique mechanism is where hope comes in, which is another one of the 4 forces. But the unique mechanism also builds trust because it answers the question of why should I believe this will work when nothing else has? Let me give you an example. There's a cognitive enhancement supplement that's using a really smart, unique mechanism strategy. Instead of just saying improves focus and memory, which every nootropic says, they've positioned their formula around something called the blood-brain barrier permeability problem. They're saying, look, most cognitive supplements don't work because the active compounds can't actually cross the blood-brain barrier. Your brain is protected by this barrier that keeps most substances out. So even if you're taking the right ingredients, they're not getting where they need to go. But our formula uses a specific delivery technology that enables these compounds to cross the blood-brain barrier. That's why it works when other nootropics don't. Now, is this scientifically accurate? Mostly, yeah. But more importantly, it's a unique mechanism. It gives the buyer a logical reason to believe this product is different. And that builds trust because the buyer is thinking, okay, this makes sense. This explains why other products didn't work for me. And this gives me hope that this one will. So the unique mechanism serves 2 functions. It creates hope, which is a pushing force, and it builds trust, which is a pulling force. This is how the 4 supplement buying forces work together. They're not separate. They're interconnected. If you're in a stage 4 market, which is even more sophisticated, you have to go even deeper because the market has heard about unique mechanisms before. They've been disappointed by them. So at stage 4, you have to differentiate your unique mechanism. You have to expand it. You have to add more proof, more specificity, more depth. And this is where transparency becomes even more important because you're not just claiming your mechanism is unique. You're showing why it's unique. You're showing the process, the research, the testing. Okay, so let's bring this all together. How do you actually audit your current trust strategy? First question, are you creating alignment through a common enemy, or are you just listing credentials? If your sales page opens with doctor-formulated, clinically tested, premium quality, you're missing the pushing force. You're not creating that initial alignment that makes the prospect feel like you get them. So look at your opening copy. Are you tapping into an existing frustration? Are you positioning yourself against something your audience is already skeptical of? If not, you're missing an opportunity. Second question, are your credibility signals matched to your audience? If you're targeting a functional medicine audience and your entire credibility strategy is based on traditional medical authority, that's a mismatch. If you're targeting a mainstream older demographic and you're positioning yourself as anti-establishment, that's also a mismatch. Your credibility signals have to align with what your market already trusts. Third question, are you being specific and transparent, or are you being vague and generic? Look at your ingredient claims. Are you saying premium quality, Or are you explaining where the ingredients come from and why that matters? Are you saying clinically tested, or are you linking to the actual studies? Specificity builds trust. Vagueness erodes it. Fourth question, are you passing the fast trust test? Pull up your sales page and look at it for 5 seconds. Just 5 seconds. What trust signals are immediately visible? Is the design professional? Is there a clear value proposition? Are there visual trust markers? If your page looks cluttered or amateur or confusing in those first 5 seconds, you're failing the fast trust test. And the visitor never gets to the slow trust phase where your actual credibility would matter. So those are the 4 questions. And if you're honest with yourself about the answers, you'll probably find some gaps in your trust strategy. So here's the bottom line. Trust is not a checklist. Trust is a psychological force, and it works in 2 directions. As a pushing force, trust is about creating alignment. It's about making the prospect feel like you're on their side, like you see what they see. The common enemy approach is the fastest way to create this alignment. As a pulling force, trust is about reducing anxiety. It's about answering objections before they become deal breakers. This is where credibility signals matter, but they have to be matched to your audience. And trust is built fast, then slow. You need visual trust signals that pass the 5-second test. And you need substantive credibility that pulls the buyer through to purchase. Most supplement brands only focus on one side of this equation. They either focus on credibility without creating alignment, or they create alignment but don't back it up with substance. You need both. And when you understand trust as both a pushing force and a pulling force, when you engineer both sides of this equation, that's when you see conversion rates actually move. Because here's the thing. In the supplement industry, you're not just competing on product quality. You're not just competing on price. You're competing on trust. And the brands that win are the ones that understand how trust actually works as a psychological force, not as a checklist item. So go audit your trust strategy. Look at your sales pages, look at your ads, look at your email sequences, and ask yourself, am I creating alignment and reducing anxiety? Or am I just listing credentials? Because that's the difference between a trust strategy that converts and one that doesn't. Before we wrap up, I want to tell you about something I've been working on. So look, I run a marketing agency called Creative Thirst. We work with supplement brands of all sizes. But I kept hearing from founders, but they're not ready for a full agency relationship or one-on-one coaching. So I built something specifically for them. It's called the Supplement Business Accelerator. Here's how it works. Every Thursday at 4:30 p.m. Eastern, we jump on a live Zoom call. You bring your problems, I solve them with you in real time. Stuck on your product page? We'll look at it together. I'll tell you exactly what to fix. Can't figure out why your ads aren't converting? Share your screen, show me what you're running. I'll diagnose what's missing. These aren't generic coaching calls. This is tactical implementation, help specific to your business. And the group is very interactive, so members are helping other members on the call. Plus, once a month, one member gets a full 60-minute hot seat where I do a complete diagnostic on their business, like mini one-on-one coaching. You also get complete video training, over 10 hours covering offer structure, ad creative, landing pages, sales copy frameworks, upsells, retention, the whole system. So you can implement things yourself, but the real value is the weekly calls. What you can't get anywhere else is me personally helping you with what actually works for supplement brands every single week. Now, 2 things you should know. First, this only works if you actually show up and implement. I can show you the frameworks. I can tell you exactly what to fix, but I can't do the work for you. This is for founders who are ready to build, not passive learners. Second, my private one-on-one clients pay $2,500 per month minimum. You get access to the same frameworks, the same weekly guidance, the same proven systems for just $97 per month. That's the founding member rate, and it's locked in for as long as you stay active. But that rate is going up. So if you're serious about growing your supplement business and you want the support you actually need to compete in today's market, now's the time. Go to creativethirst.com/group or just click the link in the show notes. I'll see you on the next call.